Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this morning we'll be talking about a discourse from the Itivuttaka, sutta number 112, which explains the meaning of the word Tathāgata, one of the titles of the Buddha. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the discourse and give some explanation, and then I'll take any questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So as mentioned, this is Itivuttaka, sutta number 112, which is called the Loka Sutta, which means the world, the discourse about the world. And as mentioned, this sutta is remarkable primarily because here the Buddha gives four very clear explanations for the meaning of the word Tathāgata. So the discourse begins, the Buddha says, this was said by the Buddha, the Arhat, this is what I heard. And the Buddha says, mendicants, the world has been understood by the Tathāgata, and he is detached from the world. So here the Buddha often, when referring to himself in third person, he would usually refer to himself as the Tathāgata. And actually this is very common throughout the suttas. Throughout the suttas, the Buddha normally speaks about himself in the third person. And he normally speaks about himself, again, referring to the standard qualities which are shared by all Samma Sambuddhas. So he's usually talking about himself not as a specific individual, but rather as an example of a category of beings, the category of beings which we call Samma Sambuddha, or simply Buddhas. And when, particularly when doing so, he would, again, refer to himself as Tathāgata. So he would say, a Tathāgata does this, the Tathāgata does that. And even when speaking about his particular biographical details, he also often tended to speak about himself in the third person. And so Tathāgata then is one of the common words that we see in the suttas as being a title for a Buddha. And it's often translated somewhat uselessly as the thus come one, or alternately the thus gone one, which are both more or less equally useless translations. And as we'll see below, when we come to the actual definitions that the Buddha gives of the word Tathāgata, the translations thus gone one and thus come one are both completely irrelevant. They don't really line up with how the Buddha himself explains the reasoning behind using this word Tathāgata when talking about a fully enlightened being. So again, the discourse begins with the Buddha saying, mendicants, the world has been understood by the Tathāgata, and he is detached from the world. The origin of the world has been understood by the Tathāgata, and he has given up the origin of the world. The cessation of the world has been understood by the Tathāgata, and he has realized the cessation of the world. The practice that leads to the cessation of the world has been understood by the Tathāgata, and he has cultivated the practice that leads to the cessation of the world. So this opening statement is interesting for a number of reasons. One thing that one may note, if one is familiar with the suttas to some degree, is that this is very similar to the standard description the Buddha gives of the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths are dukkha, the origin of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the practice that leads to the cessation of dukkha. So that same format of four steps we see in the suttas referred to a number of things other than dukkha. But in each case, it's more or less implying an equation of whatever it's being applied to with dukkha. So when the Buddha is talking about the world here, of course it does mean the world in the more general sense of the universe, the multiverse, so all phenomena, both physical and mental, everything that can be known and observed, all of that is in fact included in the world. But the world, elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha actually defines the word world as meaning sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. So the world means eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So in other words, he's saying that world is actually referring to our subjective sensory experience. So rather than talking about an objective, external, theoretically existent world, instead the Buddha is talking about world as meaning our subjective experience through our senses. And this is also relevant to the topic of dukkha, because we experience dukkha through our six senses. We experience dukkha through our relationship to the experiences that we have through body and mind. So in fully understanding the world, this means fully understanding our subjective experience of sensory impressions received through body and mind. And understanding in particular how this is ultimately bound up with dukkha. How our experience of the world is inherently dukkha-ful. It's inherently unsatisfying and unpleasant. It's inherently wrapped up with birth, aging, sickness, and death. It's wrapped up with sorrow and pain and loss and despair. So then understanding what is it that brings into being this subjective, delusional, uncomfortable experience. So what is the origin of the world? So understanding the origin of the world as being desire and attachment, and fundamentally attachment to self, attachment to the delusion of self-existence. So the Tathāgata is somebody who understands the world and is not attached to it. They're not bound to it. They understand what causes the arising of this uncomfortable delusional experience, and they've removed that cause from their own mind, so they're no longer subject to the arising of the confusing, painful world that the rest of us experience. They've realized the cessation of the world, so that means that a fully awakened being, a Tathāgata, clearly, directly, personally experiences cessation. So the experience that the rest of us are having that we think is real, well, a fully awakened being has seen the flip side of that. They've seen the cessation of that, the disappearance of that. They've seen what reality is without the world, without all of these phenomenal experiences, without sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. And in particular, again, relating to the Four Noble Truths, they've also seen and experienced for themselves the permanent and complete elimination of dukkha, the permanent and complete cessation of pain and displeasure and despair. And of course, the Tathāgata has fully practiced the spiritual path that leads to the cessation of this delusional, confusing experience that we call the world. And this is ultimately what Buddhism is. Buddhism is the path of practice which leads to letting go, dropping our painful, confusing, delusional experience of me experiencing the world. So this is what Buddhism is all about. So then the Buddha goes into the definitions of the word Tathāgata. So the first one, he says, in this world, with its gods, maras, and divinities, so that's devas. So devas are the lower of the divine beings, the ones that are a bit more human-like. So similar to the deities of the Greek and Roman pantheons or Norse pantheons, these more relatable, human-like divine beings. Then Maras are a bit higher powered devas, which tend to be not so friendly. They tend to be a little bit on the malevolent and chaotic and deceitful side. And then Brahma, so translated here as divinities. The Brahma deities are very peaceful, kind, serene beings, which exist far beyond the mundane physical reality that we have. But all three of these categories of celestial beings or divine beings, all of them are mortal and delusional, just like humans. So there, of course, throughout human history, there have been many religious traditions which centered around worshipping or revering these categories of divine beings, demigods and spirits of various sorts. But in Buddhism, that's not the case, because we recognize that they're not actually any better off than us. It's just another category of delusional suffering being. So it says, in this world, with its devas, maras, and brahmas, this population, with its contemplatives and priests, its devas and humans, so that means basically everyone, including the most advanced spiritual practitioners. And the Buddha says, whatever is seen, heard, thought, known, attained, sought, and explored by the mind, all that has been understood by the Tathāgata. That's why he is called the Tathāgata. So to explain this, it's necessary to talk a bit about the word Tathāgata. So the word Tathāgata is a compound of Tatha, and most likely the second word is Gata, though some scholars have postulated that it could be Agata, though interestingly enough that doesn't significantly change the meaning. So the word Tatha can mean as it is, or it can mean accordingly, or it can simply mean truth, the way things are. And Gata means gone to or reached or arrived at. So then Tathāgata means one who has arrived at the truth. So Tata meaning truth, and Gata meaning reached or arrived. So Tathāgata. So here the Buddha is saying that whatever is seen, heard, thought, known, attained, sought, and explored by the mind, all that has been understood by the Tathāgata. Therefore, he's called the Tathāgata, the one who has arrived at the truth, the one who has reached the truth. So you might call this the truth finder, or the truth reacher, the truth attainer. That would be one way of understanding the word Tathāgata. Then the second statement the Buddha makes, he says, from the night when the Tathāgata understands the Supreme Perfect Awakening, until the night he becomes fully extinguished in the element of extinguishment with no residue. So that's Nibbana Dhatu. So Nibbana Dhatu is the Nibbana element, the element of Nibbana. So this is the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice, is to completely, directly experience the Nibbana Dhatu, the element of the unconditioned, that aspect of reality which is not composed of discrete phenomena, which has no characteristics, in which there are no separate objects, in which there is no duality of being and non-being. This is ultimately what we're trying to directly experience, because by so doing, the mind finally lets go of the delusion of self, the delusion of self-existence. So this is saying, from the night the Tathāgata attains full awakening until the night that they pass away and enter into the Nibbana Dhatu completely. So during that time, everything he says and expresses is true and not otherwise. That's why he's called the Tathāgata. So here again it says, it's using the word Tata, so where it says everything he speaks, says, and expresses is true, so that's saying everything he speaks, says, and expresses is Tata. So again, Tata has the meaning of true, or real, as things are. So this is why he's called the Tathāgata. So here it's meaning that he's called the Tathāgata because he always speaks the truth. So he's one who's always gone truthfully. He's always spoken truthfully and always does speak truthfully. He only speaks the truth. So this definition of Tathāgata then is truth speaker. So the first one is truth finder. The second one is truth speaker. Then the third one says, the Tathāgata does as he says and says as he does. Since this is so, he's called the Tathāgata. And this is very cute in Pali, so I'm going to read it in Pali. Yathavadi Tathāgato Tathākari Yathākari Tathāvadi Iti Yathavadi Tathākari Yathākari Tathāvadi Tasma Tathāgato Itivuttaka. So this again is playing off the word tata. So as I mentioned earlier, the word tata can mean as or accordingly. So here it's saying whatever the Buddha says, he does accordingly. He acts accordingly. So yathavadi, whatever he says, tathākari, he acts accordingly. And whatever he does, yathākari, he speaks accordingly, tathāvadi. Therefore, he's called the Tathāgata. So this is quite clear in Pali, but it's a little bit difficult to capture smoothly in translation. If we wanted to capture the essence, you might say he's the consistent one, in that his actions and words are consistent. So there's no duplicity. That's the word. There's no duplicity. There's no conflict between the ideals that he presents and his actions. There's no hypocrisy in the Buddha or in any Buddha. They do as they say and they say as they do. Their teachings, their statements, their speech is in accordance with their actions. So the Buddha says, for example, the Buddha says that sensual desire is inherently harmful. And you're like, okay, he says that, but how does he act? And you watch how he acts, and you're like, oh, he actually acts without any interest in sensuality. The Buddha says that anger and hatred are harmful. You're like, well, okay, well, how does he act? And you watch how the Buddha acts, and you realize, oh, he's never angry. He's never hating. He never does anything harmful or hostile. So you're like, oh, there's consistency between his actions and his words. So this is why he's called the Tathāgata, because his actions and words are always tata. They're always in accordance. And then the fourth one, it says, in this world, with its devas, maras, and brahmas, this population with its contemplatives and priests, devas and humans, the realized one is the conqueror, the unconquered, the universal seer, the wielder of power. That's why he's called the Tathāgata. And this last one doesn't actually seem to have a clear connection with Tathāgata, with the word Tathāgata. But still, it's interesting because it's emphasizing the fact that that a Buddha is somebody who cannot be defeated by anybody else in the world, in the entire universe. Nobody else can overcome or overpower a Buddha. And this is because they're somebody who has fully understood the nature of reality. They fully arrived at absolute truth. So nothing can defeat them. Nothing can get one over on them. So this is what the Buddha said. And then, as is common with the Itivuttaka and much of the Samyutta and Anguttara Nikaya as well, the sutta ends with a series of verses, so some Pali poetry. So I'll just quickly read through this because we've already talked about the important part of the sutta, which is the definitions of Tathāgata. The rest of this is just some verses praising the Buddha. So it says, directly knowing the whole world as it is and everything in it, he is detached from the whole world, disengaged from the whole world. That attentive one is the champion who is released from all ties. He has reached ultimate peace, extinguishment, that's nibbana, fearing nothing from any direction. He is the Buddha, with defilements ended, untroubled, free of doubt. He has attained the end of all karma, freed with the ending of attachments. That fortunate one is the Buddha. He is the supreme lion. In all the world with its gods, he turns the divine wheel. And so those gods and humans who have gone to the Buddha for refuge come together and revere him. Even the deities revere him. Trained, he is the best of trainers. Peaceful, he is the seer among the peaceful. Liberated, he is the foremost of liberators. Crossed over, he is the most excellent of guides across. And so they revere him, great of heart and intrepid. In this world with its gods, he has no rival. So that's the end of the discourse. So at this time we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Bhumika, Yankee, Mike, Gita, Vanessa, Jayanta, Elenisa, Kim, Amy, Jason, and anyone else who's watching. Good to see all of you. What I don't see is any questions. So maybe this sutta was sufficiently clear. So that being the case, if no other questions appear, then we can go ahead and conclude the session with 3 more sadhus. Okay. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.